Welcome, all of you. It's a historical event today because, well, unfortunately, due to this dramatic situation we're experiencing in Ukraine, some of you are aware of the fact that our academy is organizing a whole series of lectures for professionals, but also for volunteers, for people who may in any way get in any contact with people who suffer from the current war and who experience those dramatic events, and to people who may get in touch with those events through them. And we need some specific knowledge for that and some skills. We hope that this series of lectures will inspire you to keep your eyes and ears open to any signs related to those traumatic events that those people experience, to be most efficient in our reaction to those events, to those experiences. Well, this is a historical moment because for the first time we have Professor Paul Gilbert in Poland, an incredible person. Probably many of you know him and his contribution to the popularization of CBT, but not only that, but also this humane approach to work with another person. Paul, for many years, was head of the British Association of Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. And at the same time, he was also a director for many years of a national trust in Great Britain. The whole Great Britain is divided into kind of regions, and this was the region that was taken care of by Paul. So he made sure that mental health is well taken care of. Apart from that, Professor Paul Gilbert is a university professor in Derby. He's got a lot of contributions and he's been awarded many awards and prizes for the contribution in the development of his area of expertise. And as we're aware of the fact, he's the creator, the founder of a very important approach in therapy, which is compassion-based therapy.
We've been waiting for this moment for a long time. I'm very sorry that this drastic situation in Ukraine really made you to sort of join us here, but we really very much count on your input in relation to compassion and how we can help our clients, but also how we can help ourselves. So thank you very much for being with us and supporting us. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for that very kind introduction. It's my pleasure to be with you. Perhaps pleasure is the wrong word, but it's an honor to be with you and all the work that certainly Poland and Ukraine are doing, just extraordinary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you and talk through a few ideas. And so we're going to do that now. Okay, so here we go. Let's make sure you can see that okay.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay?
Yes, it's perfect. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so compassion can often be seen as something that's soft or weak or gentle or kind or whatever, but actually compassion is probably one of the most courageous and wise of all of our motives. So this is a book that came out just this month for those of you who are interested in the approach. And what I want to say about how we are as therapists is that it's very important that we help people understand the nature of their minds. Now, we have minds that have different motives, different things we want to do. We have minds that have emotions, such as anger or joy or anxiety. We have minds that have beliefs and ways of thinking, and we have minds that enable us to behave in certain ways. So in in compassion focused therapy, these are the 4 basic domains that we are interested in. We need insight into the nature and functions of one's mind because you're going to be working with these different aspects. And in compassion focused therapy, we're interested in helping people to pursue and cultivate what's helpful to them and to be cautious about what can be harmful. The human brain, as we have seen all too well in Ukraine and other places, can be extremely harmful, very, very harmful. And so most therapists will suggest that what we have to do is to help people with these different aspects. Firstly, we need to help people become aware of what's going on in their mind. Now, for those of you who are cognitive behavior therapists, you will help people become aware of the ways in which they're thinking, the ways in which what their beliefs are. But if you were an emotion-focused therapist, you'd help them to become aware of their emotions. And if you were a psychodynamic therapist, you'd help them to become aware of things that they might not be fully conscious of. So awareness is very important, and mindfulness and attention focusing are all interventions that can help awareness. Then you want to help people be able to differentiate their emotions. They can differentiate between anger and anxiety, joy, happiness, compassion and kindness. So they can begin to make sense of their emotions. And often we help people tolerate emotions and tolerate beliefs or images or fantasies or memories that they find very difficult or they want to push away. We help people tolerate behaviors that they would rather not do. So, for example, people who have agoraphobia, you help them tolerate anxiety so they can go out. So tolerance is very important in many forms of therapy. And then when you can differentiate, you can make sense of your mind, you can tolerate different aspects of your mind, you can then begin to integrate your emotions and your motives. They start to make sense to you, and that leads to a transformed mind. And then you can become more adaptive or flexible. In acceptance commitment therapy, they talk a lot about flexibility. In CFT, we talk a lot about the ability to adapt to circumstances, adapt to context. So a lot of therapies will do that. And along the way, what you're trying to do is to help people to be able to regulate themselves, to soothe themselves, to be able to reassure themselves when they are distressed, but also to be able to encourage themselves, to give themselves support, to be able to do things that can be difficult. And this produces transformation of the self. So that's just a bit of an overview of how these therapies, many therapies work. So what we need to know then is what a mind actually is. What is a mind? How does it function? And how do we bring healing to our minds? We need to know how it came to be the way it is. So in order to work with the minds, we take an evolutionary point of view in CFT. How did it get to be the way it is? And what does it need in order to flourish? Minds are like bodies. If you feed them rubbish, they don't do very well. If you eat too many pizzas and drink too much wine, you get fat. So you have to eat healthy, but also we have to feed our minds in ways which support flourishing. Now, the thing is that we know that we are part of an evolutionary journey. We are not a new phenomenon in this planet. We are part of the flow of life. And that we, like all other animals, have been built by DNA. DNA created us. It created the basic motives of life: to survive, to reproduce, to eat, to have sex, to look after the children. All these basic motivations have been created by DNA. They haven't been created by you. And that's important because when we help people understand their minds, we help people recognize that they have a mind that's been built for them, not by them. And that what goes on in our minds is partly because of the way evolution has made our minds. We didn't make a mind that's capable of anxiety or anger or depression. And of course, nobody wants these emotions. These are unwanted emotions. Many of the things that cause us distress are the mind doing things we don't want it to do. Whereas positive emotions, we might actually try and make those things happen, but we don't train ourselves to have panic attacks or rages. Those are things that can happen even when we don't want them. And so we have to learn to observe the mind so we can see what the mind is actually doing. When we look at the mind and when we look at history, we find that unfortunately, our minds are capable of the worst possible things, right? And this is very important for us to see this in this time at the moment, that we have a very serious dark side. We are potentially one of the nastiest, most vicious, savage species that have ever existed. If you look at the histories of war or tribalism, slavery and our tortures, you can look at the Roman games, the gladiatorial games, or the fact that the Romans used to crucify people and so on. Humans are capable of some very bad things. You can remember the Holocaust, for example. But we are also capable of some very wonderful things too. We are capable of seeking peace and help, being helpful and healing. Many people have laid down their lives trying to save others. In COVID, many medical people have lost their lives trying to save people on the acute admission wards in hospitals. So we are a species of extraordinary extremes. We can be savage, nasty, and very dangerous, but we can also have this other side. So the key issue then is how do you balance these sides? How do you bring out the best in us? And we know that there are different brain systems, different physiologies, genes, and so forth, which relate to these two sides, the dark side and the compassionate side. We also know that there are things that happen.
Paul, sorry, I don't want to disturb you, but can I just ask you to sort of slow down a little bit, because
Sure.
you're talking about very important areas, but very important. And since we're doing the cascade translation, we just have to make sure that everybody follows. Sorry,
No,
but that's
so
fantastic what you're saying.
No, thank you so much. Okay.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, so we have a dark side, a terrible dark side, but we also have a wonderful compassion side too. The problem is that our compassionate side can be easily turned off. And that's a problem. If we look at many societies, the Aztecs, the Romans, Vikings, Spanish, the British, and the slave trade, for example, the compassion side was turned off. So we need to understand how that happens and why that happens. We can also have a dark side to ourselves. We can be self-critical. We can undermine ourselves. We can ruminate on negative things. We can experience shame, depression, anxiety. We can live in a very dark place within our own minds. But equally, we have a capacity for compassion to be able to work with that side. We can learn how to cope. We can learn how to encourage ourselves. We can learn how to self-reassure. We can learn how to be empathic to ourselves. Many things that we can do to help us when we get into very dark places. When people have mental health difficulties, the compassionate side gets turned off. And so all they're left with is the dark side of the mind. So let's explore the mind for a bit and see if we can make some sense of this, of why this happens. And I'm going to take you through a little bit on the 4 basic processes I discussed just now. Firstly, let's have a look at motives. all living things have three basic motives. They have to be motivated to avoid harm, avoid injury, avoid predators. But they also have to be motivated to do things, to achieve things, to find food, to find shelter, to find mates. We call these the acquiring or the seeking motives. And third, they have to be motivated to rest and digest, to be able to sleep, to slow down, to let the body recuperate. So motives are what guides you through your life. Now, some of the things you might want to do might be having relationships, having children, having a career. And in any of those, you'll also want to avoid harmful things. Now, what that means is that we've also got emotions. Now, emotions are different to motives because emotions are short-term, motives are long-term. They exist in you for years and years, whereas emotions, they come and they go. Emotions are changes of body state, and they're there to help the motives. So if you get frustrated, you're trying to do something and you can't do it, you might feel angry. But you might also feel anxious. Or if you lose something, you might feel sad. And we'll look at those emotions shortly. We also have what we call competencies. Now, competencies are the aspects of the mind that allow you to do certain things. So birds need wings to fly, but they also need a brain that will allow them to fly. And the bird might fly away from danger, or they might fly to find food, or they might fly to find a mate. The motive for flying can differ, but the act of flying is always the same. Humans have many cognitive competencies. We are able to reason, to think things through. We also have empathy. And we also have what we call consciousness of consciousness. Consciousness of consciousness. And this is what allows us to be aware that we have a mind. Consciousness of consciousness allows us to have an awareness of being alive, of having a self, of knowing we exist. As far as we know, we're the only animal that can do that. And we can use these qualities of mind, our ability to reason, our capacity for empathy, and our abilities to be mindful, to help us regulate our minds. Now, this is important because empathy is a competency. It is not a motive. Many different things. If you want to be good at lying, deceiving, you're going to be more successful if you have empathy. So empathy can be used for many things. One of the things it's used for is compassion, of course. And then finally, we have behaviors. Now, behaviors are very important because sometimes we need to, and that will require courage because you're going to move towards things that are difficult, things that are painful, or possibly even things that are dangerous. But that is not enough because you also need, you also need to be able to take action, right? take action, you also need to be able to take action. And this is very important because both taking the action, doing something to alleviate or prevent distress, also requires wisdom. If I see somebody fall into a river and I jump in to save them, but I can't swim, I will sink. So that's what we would call reckless compassion. Courageous, but reckless, because it lacks wisdom. On the other hand, I may know how to swim. I may be a very good swimmer, but I'm too frightened to jump in. I lack the courage, and therefore my wisdom can't be used. So this is important. The compassion is rooted in courage and wisdom. Courage without wisdom can be reckless. Wisdom without courage can be ineffective. So you need the two. So when we look at it from a Buddhist point of view, the Buddhists have similar view of compassion, and that's not surprising because we use their concepts as well. And this is that they have the basic idea of may all beings be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. So that is the compassionate motto. It's called Karuna, Karuna. Okay, that's what it's called in Tibetan. Now, because you're wanting to address the causes of suffering, then you're definitely wanting to prevent suffering. And the prevention of suffering is extremely important, because one of the things that we as a species have to do is to find ways to prevent the kinds of things that are going on in Ukraine. As I said at the beginning of the talk, this kind of horror show with terrible atrocities has been going on for thousands of years. We've been killing each other and torturing each other for thousands of years. We have to work out how we're going to stop that. That has to be one of the great challenges of humanity. So climate change is certainly one. Getting the better medical system and preparing for viruses is another one. But this one, addressing the dark side of the mind and preventing individuals who cause suffering, that has to be a huge one. The other thing I would say is that compassion is slightly different from caring, because many animals care for their offspring, don't they? And they care for their babies and so on, but they don't have compassion. They'll have the vagus nerve and oxytocin, but we have these competencies, you see. We have an ability to have knowing awareness. We have a capacity for empathy. Now, animals have it to a degree, but not like we do. The ability to know what we're doing and understand what we're doing and work out how to do things effectively, this is what gives rise to compassion. When we use our new brains, our social intelligence, to be caring, this is compassion. Otherwise, it's just caring. The other thing that makes compassion compassion is consciousness or sentience. What this means is that you can care for your car or your house or whatever, but if they are damaged, you will be disappointed and upset, but you wouldn't have compassion for them because they don't have a mind. They don't have a consciousness. They can't suffer. So that's important. That's very important. That's compassion is for the experience of suffering as well as the causes of suffering. And you can only suffer if you have a conscious mind. So we can see then that compassion is when we are able to use our knowing intentionality, we know what we're doing on purpose to develop our sensitivity and empathic understanding into the nature of suffering and its causes, and then use our wisdom of the human mind to try to courageously alleviate and prevent it and act on it. It's a bit of a big definition, so we like to keep it to the smaller one. And it's very important to recognize then that compassion is different from empathy. Empathy is a way of being compassionate. It is different to kindness. Kindness is a way of being compassionate, but you don't need the courage and the wisdom for kindness as you do for compassion. Kindness can be about making people happy, remembering their birthday, and that's very nice. But compassion is specifically about engaging with distress and suffering. If you're wanting to do loving kindness, this is called metta in the Buddhist traditions. Okay, so then we can have this basic orientation to life. May I live to be helpful, not hurtful or harmful. And that becomes a daily affirmation. You want to do that. And we can direct compassion to the self. We can direct compassion to others. And we can respond to compassion from others. And these are all very important processes that we do in therapy. So it's very important to understand that compassion is not a benzo. Now, what that means is it's not like Valium. It's not a tranquilizer. Okay? Sometimes people say you need to have a calm mind to be compassionate. Well, it will help you. And when you train in compassion, having a calm mind will help you. But this individual probably does not have a calm mind. Okay? This individual probably has a lot of anxiety to get the child out the burning house. What they need is a mind that can follow an intention regardless of the emotion. Okay, so they go into the burning house, they don't run away. This person, on the other hand, has the skills to fight injustice. This is Martin Luther King, to fight injustice. Okay. And some of the amazing things that are happening in Ukraine and trying to save people, these are highly compassionate acts, immense courage and wisdom shown by the Ukrainian people. But they're not in a calm mind. They're in a very frightened mind. And the ability to deal with that fear and still try and rescue and save people, that is what makes it compassionate. So what links all of these three things together is not the emotion, it is the motive to address suffering where we can. So this is quite important when we think about compassion, otherwise we can get compassion wrong. And that means that sometimes when you're helping people with compassion, you're helping to develop their courage, you're helping to develop their wisdom, you're helping to develop their tolerance. That's what compassion is doing. We can also think about heroic compassion. Okay? Heroic compassion is when it involves an act, not just a thought or a feeling. The goal is the welfare of a person in danger. The action taken has consequences for that person. There must be some risk for the person taking action. The action is taken with no expectation or reward. So heroic compassion is a very important concept. It's being developed by people like Paul Ekman. You can see this. Just go to paulekman.com. That's his blog, and you can read all about heroic compassion. And heroic compassion is not fierce compassion. Fierce compassion is not a concept we would use. We would talk much more about heroic compassion, courage and wisdom. And Philip Zimbardo has also got what he calls the Heroic Imagination Project. And this is the ways in which compassion is rooted in heroism. And again, we see extraordinary acts of compassion in Poland in taking in refugees and trying to be helpful. These are all deeply compassionate acts. Deeply compassionate acts. They are extraordinary acts of compassion. And we know that although the leaders in Russia we would see as non-compassionate, we would see them as callous, there are examples of compassionate leaders. This is the Dalai Lama, obviously, but Nelson Mandela was another one in South Africa who prevented a bloodbath, and his colleague Desmond Tutu. Most people regard these as very compassionate leaders. And of course, there's another brilliant, amazing compassionate leader who is called Zelensky. And he's a compassionate leader partly because he has constantly promoted courage and wisdom, constantly. He has stood by his people at considerable risk to himself. He didn't flee. He could have fled, but he didn't flee. He stayed. He has visited people around other places and sought inspiration. He's tried whenever he can to build positive collaboration and alliances. He has not promoted offensive aggression. It's all defensive aggression. He hasn't promoted terrorist acts in Moscow or anything like that. At no time has he done that. And he has contextualized the crisis, not just as a crisis of Ukraine, but actually as an issue about the freedoms of all of us, really. This is a key issue. So what's happening in Ukraine really goes to the heart of the key problem with humanity, that humanity has a terrible dark side. And if we don't learn how to regulate it, if we keep stimulating it, then we'll end up with these kinds of horrible situations. So let's think about working with our emotions. Can I just check now, how much longer have I got, Inga? Iga?
Well, in theory or in practice?
Just how much?
Because, well, originally we said an hour, yes. So we started a few minutes after 6 o'clock, Polish 6 o'clock. But we just follow what you're saying, and we're not going to stop in the middle.
Okay, so I'm going to now move to, I'm going to miss out a few slides so that I can get to some practices, okay? But don't worry about that, because what I will do is I will ensure that you get all the slides, which is to do with the, how emotions work and so forth. But I want to get to the, to the exercises for you. So one of the key things then is compassion really is about the caring system. It evolved with the caring system. And we know that the evolution of attachment and affiliation brought with it a range of changes to the body and the brain that include hormones like oxytocin, the vagus nerve. And when you activate those, your mind can be organized to help calm threat system, but also become courageous and promote pro-social behavior. Just like if we stimulate your sexual system, you'll get excited. If we stimulate your appetite system, you'll get hungry. If we stimulate your fear system, you'll get frightened. It's no different. You have these systems in the brain that when we stimulate them, we can create experiences of caring and wanting to be cared for. Now, a very important approach to caring behavior was developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. And they highlighted 3 basic functions of caring. Firstly, that the infant is able to have proximity to the parent because the parent is the source of care and provision. And what the parent does is to provide a secure base. And this secure base enables the child to learn, to grow, to develop, to take risks. The parent encourages the child to go out and experience in the world. But they also provide what is called a safe haven. Now, Now, a safe haven is that which enables the child to calm down. So if the child is distressed, they will go back to the parent will pick them up, and gradually the child will calm down. So these are very important aspects of the caring system, and therefore they're going to be important aspects of compassion too, because compassion is linked to caring. And part of these systems are regulated by social signals, by the way we speak, or facial expressions. So, oops. So here is an example of secure base, stimulating positive emotions of drive and excitement and joyfulness. These interactions help the child feel lovable and good about themselves because they're stimulating these positive emotions in the child's brain. This playful, joyful interactions are very, very important. On the other hand, there are times when the parent will do the opposite. Instead of getting them excited, they will calm them down. That's called safe haven function. So the child trusts the parent, and that trust creates this experience of being able to be calmed down. Play is very important. Okay, now this is a nice little video, which I'll show you, which shows you an example of secure base and safe haven in an elephant. So the elephant charges around. It falls over and quickly runs back to mum. Okay, so the mum was looking out for the infant, and the moment the infant has got a bit distressed, runs back to mother. Mother will calm the baby down, and then the baby will go back to exploring again. So while the mother is there, the baby is very happy to run around and explore. And then if something happens, go back to mum, calm down, and that's how that system works. We also know that for humans, we became very much community-based, that rather than just relying on a mother and a father, in our early societies, hunter-gatherer societies, actually we were cared for by communities. And our strongest attachments might have been to an aunt or a grandmother, not necessarily the mother. So the child was able to form attachments with individuals that cared about them in the community. And we've kind of lost that. And we know that that community, that process of living in caring communities supported human intelligence. And this today is one of the great joys of life, of feeling we are part of a community, we belong, we have friends. Very, very important. This means that when we think about the psychology, how do we create compassion? Well, we can create a secure base. So what is a secure base? What do you do as a therapist? Well, as a therapist, you create a secure base because you help your client, you encourage your clients, you develop their courage to explore things that are difficult to them, to do difficult things. You help them develop their wisdom. You have psychoeducation about the nature of the vagus nerve, about what compassion is and what it isn't. You set behaviors for them to try out. Another aspect is that you validate your client. You help them feel understood and empathically engaged. You help them develop their abilities to empathize and mentalize, and you help them develop emotion regulation skills. But what's also important in CFT in particular is to help people find joy if they can. Now, in these situations, sometimes it's very difficult for people to find joy, but even so, it's quite an important aspect of hope. Now, a colleague of mine who worked in California with people who are dying of cancer in groups. So even though people are dying, they can still laugh together. There can still be a playfulness together. They cry together. They share their fears of dying together, but they can also at times bond together. So when you're working in groups, also try to create a safe base and secure base where people can experience basic social relating, right? Very, very important. And then also the safe haven is the ability to learn how to regulate our emotions, how to ground ourselves when we are distressed, this ability to hold ourselves, to settle ourselves, and to have care for ourselves is very, very important. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do now, okay, I won't go into that. Okay, what I want to do now is just talk to you a little bit about this. Now, because of the attachment system, it means that we have two very different ways of dealing with threat. One way is a direct, so you run away or you fight or you flight or whatever. And this system is very involved in trauma. Traumatized people are very much here, and they are very much into the fight and flight system. You can also learn skills of how to deal with threat, but it's still you in relationship to the threat. What the attachment system did was it gave us a very new way of dealing with threat. Oh, sorry. Oh, dear. And this is that we can turn to others for support. We can turn to others for encouragement. We can turn to others for soothing and calming and grounding. The ability to turn to others is very important, and that reduces threat processing because it has an indirect effect on the amygdala. So the vagus nerve, when you stimulate the vagus nerve through the green system, this has an impact on the frontal cortex and the amygdala, so on. So this is important. So the key thing then is we can distinguish between what we call safety, which is trying to get away from threats or deal with threats. But safety won't necessarily encourage you. Safety won't necessarily promote a sense of community or sharing or caring. You might feel safe, but you can still feel very alone. So what's important when we're dealing with these traumas and tragedies is to try to stimulate a sense of connectedness, even in very difficult times. So the sense of not being alone. And that can depend on social trust. So this is why it's quite important to keep people together if at all possible. And although they are being split up around the country, also create opportunities for Ukrainian families to come together as a group and support each other and share with each other and so on. Very, very important process. Okay. Okay, so this is what happens when children, so this is really about children. Okay, so I'm not going to go into that. What I'm going to go into now is to go through some exercises. Okay, so what we're wanting to do then is to stimulate the care system and stimulate the body part of the care system, stimulate the emotions of the care system, stimulate the behaviors and the thoughts of the care system. So I'm going to show you some exercises now to stimulate your compassionate mind. So this is the next part of the workshop. And the first part we call using the body to support the mind. So in order for you to begin to get your vagus nerve going, it's important to have an attention to posture. Now, when you're frightened or angry, your body will always curl inwards. You'll curl inwards, okay? So that's anxiety is that, isn't it? Depression is like that. Fighting is like that. Nobody fights like that, do they? They all curl inwards. So, but when we're confident and safe, the body is open. So the first thing I'm going to invite you to do is to lift your shoulders up and back so that you open the chest becomes open, and the curve in your back goes from pointing outwards to pointing inwards. And as your back curves inwards, it will lift your diaphragm. So you can try that, just curling up like this, and then shoulders up and back, and just feel your back point inwards, and this lifts your diaphragm. So posture is the first part of the exercise, because we want you to use your diaphragm, because your diaphragm is very important for the vagus nerve. The next thing we're going to invite you to do is a grounding. Now, some people who have been traumatized find this difficult. So if that's the case, you can help them to do it very slowly, or they can do body movement, which I'll show you in a minute. But just to start with, the basic breathing pattern that we use is about 4 breaths per minute. So I'm going to invite you to breathe in through your nose, hold the breath for about 2 or 3 seconds, and then breathe out through your nose. And I'd like you to count 5 seconds as you breathe in and 5 seconds as you breathe out. And try to enable the breath to come down into this part of your body, down into your diaphragm, down here. And you can even imagine the breath going down to the base of your spine. So sitting in the posture then, let's begin to do that. We'll do that for 1 minute, just so you get the hang of it. So breathing in nice and slowly, and breathing out nice and slowly, as deep as you can get the breath. More or less fill your lung. Don't have a half fill, more or less fill it. And try to ensure that the lung's empty. Okay, so you don't want half breaths, you want the lung to be more or less fill and more or less empty. Okay, I'm going to give you 1 minute to do that. Now, as you're breathing, try and have a sense of your body and mind slowing down. And maybe noticing that the chair is holding you up. Feel the weight settling into the chair. This is becoming grounded. Now, for people who find that difficult because it makes them anxious, they can lift their arms up as they breathe in and drop them as they breathe out. Or they can roll the hands up like this. Or they can do a Qigong movement. Let's see if I can show you this. In the Qigong movement, you have your hands like that. And then as you breathe out in, you bring your hands to your face. You turn your hands over and you push up. That's breathing in. And then as you breathe out, you stretch out to the sides, and then you bring your hands down. So sometimes clients prefer to do the physical, not just focus on the body. Okay? So the next thing I'm going to invite you to do is to notice facial expressions. And I'm going to give you a minute to just keep to that breathing pattern, but create a friendly face on your, create a friendly facial expression try to imagine that you're greeting somebody you really like. And then create a neutral expression, just neutral. Do that for a little bit and then go back to a friendly expression. Try and notice the difference in the feeling when you create friendly face, because the muscles of your face feed back into your brain. Okay, so I'm going to give you a minute just to do that. Notice what it's like when you really try and create a friendly facial expression, as if you're greeting somebody you really like. Okay, that's wonderful. Now then you've got your posture, you've got your breathing, you have your facial expression. You can create a very friendly tone in your mind, so that as you breathe out, you focus on the words mind slowing down. So you bring all those elements together. And we would also invite you to stimulate your vagus nerve. A good exercise, like going to the gym, is to practice walking down the street with a friendly face, okay? And trying to greet people that you see with a friendly smile or just a nod of the head. Practice friendliness, because it's very good for your brain. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is to invite you to imagine your ideal compassionate other. We call this the compassionate image. Actually, we're not going to do that. We're going to do something first. I think we could do this first. We're going to invite you first to focus on a compassionate wisdom. Okay, I'm sorry, I forgot, I got the order wrong. Focus on a compassionate wisdom. Now, the wisdom is this. Every living thing just found itself here. No lion chose to be a lion. No elephant chose to be an elephant. No human chose to be a human. No man chose to be a man, or a woman. We were just born this way. Nobody chose to have 2 legs and 2 arms. And nobody chose to have the feelings and the motives that they have. You did not put into your brain a system that makes you want to eat. It makes you feel hungry, or makes you feel tired, or makes you angry, or makes you sexual. You did not design any of that. That's all being designed for you by your DNA. So a lot of what you are experiencing has been created for you, not by you. And that's why all humans can experience similar emotions and desires, because we're all working the same biological machine called brains. So that means what happens inside of you is not your fault. And if I'd been kidnapped as a 3-day-old baby into a violent drug gang, that wouldn't have been my fault either. But I could have become a very aggressive person. And this version of Paul Gilbert wouldn't exist. So if it's not our fault how we have become, what is our responsibility? Our responsibility is to understand our minds as best we can and try to avoid them from being harmful. We don't blame ourselves for the fact we can be harmful, but we try to understand our minds so that we're not harmful to ourselves or to others. It's a little bit like learning to drive a car. You didn't design the car, but you need to work out how to drive it so that you don't crash. So you wouldn't blame yourself for putting the steering wheel right in front of you. You wouldn't blame yourself for putting the accelerator on the floor. That's all part of the design, right? So there's no point in blaming yourself for the system of anger or anxiety because you didn't design that. Your job as best you can is to work out how to work with these difficult emotions. So rather than blaming and shaming, we work out my responsibility is to learn how to drive my mind as best I can, right? Without blaming myself for it. Because if you start blaming yourself and getting into self-criticism, that causes all kinds of trouble. So this is a wisdom that we're all caught up here. No one wants to suffer, but many people have no idea about how to run their minds. They don't, because nobody's taught them, you see. Nobody's shown them. Then the next part of the compassionate wisdom is to recognize then that because the mind is so difficult, we will make a commitment to try to be aware of what's going on in our minds, to be mindful, and try as best we can to act compassionately. So I might feel very angry, but I'll try and be assertive, not aggressive. I might not succeed, but I will try. I might feel very anxious, but I'm not going to run away. I might feel like running away, but I'm going to try not to run away. And this is important in many things, you know, even with eating behavior, you know. I might want to eat 2 pizzas and drink wine, but I'm going to try as best I can not to do that because that's not good for my health. So we make a commitment that where we can, we're going to try to be helpful despite our urges. We're going to try to be helpful, not harmful. Okay, so that's the compassionate wisdom. So the next thing then is creating a compassionate interaction. Now, many of our emotions are driven by imagined relationships. So for example, if you lay in bed and imagine or remember an argument, what happens in your body? If, on the other hand, you remember a time when you were happy and enjoyed a holiday or something, or you remember a good friend and how helpful they were to you, what happens in your body. Or it could be a sexual fantasy. But again, it's imagining an interaction with another human being. So compassionate imagery is basically the same. We invite you to imagine interacting with a compassionate other. And the other you imagine is somebody who you create in your mind. They're your fantasy, just like a sexual fantasy or a fantasy of a friend. They're a fantasy of somebody who you would regard as very compassionate. Now, some patients don't like to imagine people, but they can imagine animals. Now, the key thing then is, what is it that makes this fantasy, this image in your mind, what is it that makes them compassionate? Is it maybe they encourage you, maybe they validate you, maybe they have joy for you, maybe they play with you, maybe they are very friendly towards you, maybe you completely trust them, all right? You create the image as you need it to be. And then every day, you practice imagining having a conversation or talking to this image. And just notice what happens when you do that. Now, people say, oh, but it's not real. Well, that might be true, but think of your sexual images. You use sexual fantasy to create arousal. It's not real. You use it because you want to stimulate the body, right? You're not worried that it's real or not real. And sometimes you might not want it to be real. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter that it's not real, okay? What matters is you create an experience of an interaction. And the practice of doing that is itself stimulating your brain. So if we put people into a scanner and invite them to imagine relating to a compassionate other, brain systems all light up. So this is a very useful practice, and you can have more than one. One of my patients, she had a different image for her menstrual cycle. In the middle of the month, she'd have one type of image, but towards the ending of the month, she'd have a different image because they were doing different things for her. The image is to do something in your mind. It's how you feel about your image. So don't create images you think you should create. Feel them to be compassionate because they're unique to you. They're just yours, nobody else's. So that's really quite a useful thing. So remember then, you've got the using the body to support the mind, developing the vagus nerve, practicing friendliness, using your compassionate wisdom of no blame, but you will try to understand your mind if you can, because you didn't build it. It's been built for you. Then you've got practicing dialoguing in your mind, which is what we do all the time, but this time with a compassion focus. And the next one we're going to do is just imagining you at your most compassionate, right? If you could be the most compassionate person, what would you be like? So you can probably imagine an angry you, or an anxious you, or maybe a playful you. You can imagine yourself like that. But this one is to imagine yourself as a compassionate you. This is the most compassionate person, right? You're the most compassionate person. Just imagine, what would you be like? What qualities would you have? What would it feel like? Maybe tonight you can walk around imagining just being at your compassionate best. Breathing, grounding, friendly face. This determination to develop a compassionate mind. And think about how joyful that would be for you. That would be wonderful, wouldn't it, really? Just feeling that joyfulness of developing your compassionate mind. This is a mind with wisdom. This is a mind that can ground itself. This is a mind that might be forgiving or patient or friendly or whatever qualities you think are important. You can create an image of how you would like to be if you were at your compassionate best. You can create that image and then you can practice it. Okay, I'm going to give you a little example of how this works. So for a moment, bring to mind a little bit of something that's a bit of a problem for you. Nothing too major, obviously. Don't get into too heavy things, but just a little bit of a, bit of a worry or something irritated about. Just bring that to mind. And bring it to mind and try and feel the emotion of that situation. So if the situation is making you irritable, just try and imagine that. If it's making you anxious, try to just imagine feeling that. Just for a minute or two, just for a bit. Okay, now put the angry side or the anxious side to one side, and now just make sure you're breathing, bring your facial expression, bring your compassionate wisdom. Just imagine now thinking about your life problem, but this time with your compassionate mind. Feel your inner courage, feel your inner wisdom. Feel your validation of yourself. Okay, so just practice the breathing, friendly face, feel your courage, feel your wisdom, and how you're going to bring that to this problem. Okay, well done. So I'm going to begin to end the workshop now. So what I've tried to do in this short time we've had together to talk to you a little bit about compassion is emotive, and you can have different emotions depending on whether you're a firefighter or what you're doing. But it's learning how to work with those emotions, not suppress them. Then we looked at the ways in which compassion is an algorithm, and then we looked at compassion stimulates the caring system, and when it does that, it stimulates a whole range of physiological systems in your body and your brain. And when it does that, this enables you to work with things that are threatening to you. Now, when it comes to helping people from Ukraine, you've got a huge number of other issues because of the losses, right? So these individuals have got a huge number of losses. Okay, they may have lost people they love. They may have lost their communities. They may have lost their homes. They've lost their country. They may have lost confidence in themselves. They may have lost their faith. They may have lost their hope. So these individuals are really confronting a horrendous sense of loss, as well as fear, right? Fear might also be there as well. Of course, that's right. And the other problem is that we can have our own dark side stimulated. So one of the serious problems is for the generations to come is how to heal hatred, because there will be such hatred. And there always is. There always is. These situations seed absolute awful hatred. And so as therapists and working with communities, that's another issue we're going to have to address, how to help people who have every right, of course, to experience hatred, but hatred is a poison in the end. Okay, so compassion then helps us to develop the wisdom and the courage of how to address suffering, how to develop the determination to do that, to recognize that humans, unfortunately, have a terrible dark side, okay? We have a terrible dark side, and we can be awful to other people, but we can also be pretty bad to ourselves as well. But if we bring compassion to the dark side, it gives us a chance to heal it. And so I'm now going to say thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you. I will ensure that these slides are sent to you. There's a whole number of them I didn't go through because of time, but you can see them anyway. And I'm going to hand now back to Iga.
Pani Iga jest poruszona tym, co usłyszała.
Well, Iga is touched and moved by what you have said in those beautiful words. You're talking about human nature, which on one hand is so weak, but on the other hand, it can be incredibly heroic and brave and focused on, like in the last exercise, to see this difficult part of the world in a completely different light, from a different perspective. And I think this exercise will carry us forward, because I hope that everyone experienced it through this exercise. So thank you for making us aware of that you give us courage, that is, we should not give up and we should carry on doing what we're doing, and let's implement it in our lives. Thank you, Paul. We're even more eager to have you here in Poland and work with us. We really, really need that. So I truly hope that we will soon be able to go back to you with a friendly face, with this imagined image of a friendly face, and you being in Poland and sharing your compassion. It's a beautiful lesson from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bardzo dziękujemy wszystkim.
We would like to thank all the participants as well for your support in all the activities regarding the aid for Ukraine. NGO, namely KIK, that does that. We really would like to thank everybody who contributed to this meeting, and Robert Leahy, our guardian angel of the whole undertaking. He inspires us to develop our workshop, our professional skills. So thank you very much, and I hope you'll get more compassion in your approach. Thank you, Paul, once again.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye. Thank you.